Most people don't fail at money because they lack discipline. They fail because they're trying to live out someone else's financial identity. If you've ever wondered why your goals don't stick, even when you're doing everything right, this episode is for you. We're talking about wealth identity, how you relate to money, and why that matters more than any strategy. Don't go anywhere.
Yeah. So they might be willing
Hello, my financial whizzes in training. My folks are doing well on paper, but it feels like it's taking up space, much more mental space than it actually needs to. Welcome back to another episode of the Do Different Better show. I'm your host, Elaine Rasmussen, CEO and founder of Connective Institute, Social Impact Now, and Do Different Better. I am a strategist, I'm an investor, and someone who has spent a lot of years helping people activate their wealth without losing themselves in the process. If you're listening on AM 950 on Sundays at 10 a.m., welcome. If you're catching this on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube, I am so glad that you're here. Today's episode is about wealth identity, not your net worth, not your credit score, and certainly not your budget, but how to relate to money and why that relationship quietly shapes every goal you ever set, every decision you avoid, and every plan that never really quite sticks. So let me start with something that might sound familiar to you. You hear a financial goal, maybe it's from a friend, a colleague, something you see on TV, or something you saw on Instagram or TikTok. That goal might be save more, invest aggressively, pay off the debt first, buy assets. And instead of feeling inspired, you actually begin to feel tense. Maybe your palms start to sweat, your stomach starts to contract. And it's not because the advice is bad, but because something in your body is telling you that's not actually how I do money or want to do money or think about money. And here's the truth that most financial spaces won't tell you. People don't fail at money because they lack discipline, although that sometimes is the case. They more often fail because they're copying goals built for someone else's identity. We set goals that look good, goals that sound reasonable, goals that impress strangers on the internet, and then we quietly abandon them. And many times it's not because we're lazy, but because the goals were never aligned with how we actually operate currently and think about money, which doesn't mean that we can't change that, but it is grounded in how we think about it and feel about it right now in this moment when we're actually going through and talking about those things. This is why in the Do Different Better work, we actually start with wealth identity. Your wealth identity answers questions like, what do I instinctively do when money shows up? Without even thinking, what stresses me out the most about money? What does responsible actually mean to me? And what am I secretly optimizing for safety, speed, and progress? Your wealth identity is not a flaw, it's actually a pattern. And once you can name the pattern, you can stop moralizing your behavior and start designing around that. And that's where you begin to feel powerful. It's through your agency because now you have data, you have good, solid information. So I want to do something a little different in this segment. I want to walk you through a simplified version of my wealth identity quiz, which is what we use in the Do Different Better live in person event. You don't need to write anything down. You might be listening to this in your car or on your way to pick up the kids or drop them off at soccer practice. But I just want you to notice which answers feel like you, if you feel something bubbling up, because recognition is the first form of clarity. So I want you to be thinking about, your armpits start to get a little tight or start to sweat a little bit? Is your heartbeat feeling a little bit faster? I want you to just pay attention. I'm going to give you a few scenarios. And as I read them, just notice which one you gravitate towards. It's going to be 4 answers: A, B, C, or D. I don't want you to judge it, and I don't want you to overthink it. So let's get started. The best money plan is one that A, is measurable and consistent, B, protects the people I care about, C, accelerates progress fast, or D, reduces complexity and decision fatigue. Notice what you're currently optimizing for, or what came up for you, what made your heart beat a little bit faster, like, oh yeah, that's me. The next one, your biggest financial frustration is A, not moving fast enough, B, feeling like it's never just about me, C, feeling behind and comparing yourself to others, D, having too many accounts, logins, and loose ends. That frustration is a clue. It's actually not failure. So I'm going to bring all this together. Next, when life gets stressful, your money behavior becomes A, tighter and more structured, B, more reactive. I start covering all the gaps. C, more intense. I try to fix it by making big bets, big moves. Or D, more avoidant. I don't even want to think about it. This is the one that usually lands really hard for folks. Stress doesn't change who we are, it actually just reveals it. So I can tell you, when I decided to walk away from my full-time job without having another job and then decided to start my business, the conversation with my partner, when I shared, like, I want to quit my job. It's getting very toxic and unbearable, and I'd rather be without a job than to have to go into that job one more day. And the first thing that he was like, okay, let's cancel everything. Let's cancel all of our streaming services. Let's cancel the gym. Let's cancel. I said, well, whoa, 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 whoa. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. I said, first of all, we have money. Let's actually, instead of just cutting everything off, let's actually wait and let's see how what kind of pressure are we feeling after a couple months? Can we maintain our lifestyle? Maybe I'm going to get another job really quickly. If I do, or if I find some consulting work, because I'd done that before, we won't have to adjust our lifestyle. So instead of, but his response was like, cut everything, scale back. And it wasn't that I didn't have an appreciation for that, but we both had different wealth identities in that moment. My identity was very comfortable with, like, hey, let's just sit in this let's not make any rash decisions, and let's sit in this for about 30 to 60 days and see where we're at and see what actually makes sense to cut, right? Because the goal wasn't also to, like, devastate our lifestyle. And it turned out, after just a few weeks, I got more work, I got more contracting work, and it only was another 4 months before I decided to start my business. And we didn't have to reduce our lifestyle in any substantive way or fashion. But again, he was really sitting a lot of discomfort about us not having that income coming in, because he didn't see that there was another possibility of that income being replaced because I wasn't going to have a job. So once again, that's how these dynamics can play out in partnerships. So it's really needs to be really clear, if you getting clear about your wealth identity, but also having really good conversations with your partner to understand their wealth identity and see where the friction might be caused. Quick pause. If you're already thinking, wow, Elaine, this is me, I want you to make sure you're following me at Do Better with Elaine on Instagram, and you can find me on LinkedIn, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. This is the kind of work that we actually do at Do Different Better. It's really about identifying some of these patterns so you can stop fighting with yourself, but also fighting with others around you, other family members. All right, let's get back to the quiz. Motivated by A, progress and structure, B, security and responsibility. C, achievement and freedom. D, simplicity and alignment. Pay attention to what feels calming versus exciting, right? Those are two very different emotions, but also they show up in your body very differently. Calming is like maybe you've taken a deep breath. You're like, "Ah," right? Excited is that your heart's going faster, right? Maybe your hands are getting a little sweaty, or maybe your leg is twitching a little bit, right? Okay, on to the next question. Your financial blind spot tends to be A, perfectionism. B, self sacrifice. C, stacking way too many goals that you probably won't realistically be able to accomplish. Or D, delaying decisions because it all feels like a lot. It's overwhelming. If this one made you laugh or wince, you're not alone, right? There are actually people, I actually had somebody working with me for a while, and it became very clear to me at every opportunity she was leaving money on the table. We would get into negotiations with partners that were going to pay us on a contract. And at the slightest friction between us and the vendor or us and the client, she would just leave money on the table, money that we were entitled to. But because she didn't want to actually have a very transparent conversation, and when I say leaving money on the table, we're not talking about a little bit of money. We're talking like $4,000 in one instance, $6,000 in another instance. And I finally had to say to her, like, you don't like money. And she was like, no, I do. I said, I don't think you do, because you find too many opportunities to give it away and not think that money that you've worked for, that you deserve, that you should have. So that's how maybe some of these things might be showing up in your life. All right, let's talk about what some of these patterns mean. If you found yourself choosing mostly A answers, you're likely that you're a builder. Builders are disciplined, they are future focused, they want to plan. Your strength is consistency. Your risk is perfectionism. You don't need more motivation, you need a clean sequence or scoreboard. If you chose mostly B, you're likely the caretaker. Caretakers are so generous. They're responsible, maybe often firstborn. They often are carrying more than their share of the financial weight. This also happens with women in relationships. Your strength is your resilience. However, your risk is often over self sacrifice. You are strong, but you are not a financial safety net with legs. Okay? If you chose mostly C, you're likely a maximizer. Maximizers are high performers. They are very growth oriented and they're very capable of big wins. Their strength is their ambition. However, their risk is stacking too many goals at a time. More goals does not equal more progress. And actually, they begin to spiral because they feel bad because they didn't accomplish all those goals. Now, if you chose mostly D, you're likely the minimalist strategist. Minimalists value clarity. They value simplicity and they value peace. Your strength is your discernment. Your risk is avoidance when things get a little too complex. Your path isn't more hustle, it's less friction, right? So I think that kind of describes the person I was just sharing with you about. So here's the important thing that I will say in this segment. Your wealth identity determines which goals will actually stick. When you set goals that fight your identity, that's when you check out, burn out, or just avoid. When you set goals that honor your identity, you actually begin to build momentum. This is why one size fits all financial advice fails. It ignores how people actually operate. So, we're going to bring this to a close. In this next segment, I'm going to be talking about what happens after you name your wealth identity, because that is just as important, right? How do you build goals that actually fit your identity? How do you stop copying strangers' timelines or TikToks? How do you move forward without actually betraying yourself? That is where the real work needs to begin. So I will see you after the break. Welcome back to the Do Different Better show. I'm your host, Elaine Rasmussen. If you're just joining us, we're talking about wealth identity, how you actually do money, and why copying other people's goals might keep backfiring on you, and you're not seeing the success that you're trying to get to. So let's go ahead and let's get into it. All right. Here's the part that nobody wants to admit. And I didn't even want to admit it for a very long time to myself. Most people don't fail at financial goals because they're unrealistic, although that does happen sometimes, right? They fail because the goals were never theirs to begin with. We often borrow goals that we hear from coworkers, from podcasts, from family expectations, from social media, from financial advisors who aren't living our life. They don't know actually all the ins and outs of our lives. And we tell ourselves, if I just try harder, I can make this work. I just need to work on this more. I need to give it more time. I need to whatever the case may be is, but effort cannot override misalignment. When a goal doesn't match your wealth identity, your nervous system treats it like a threat, not a target. So, some of the things that you might do are you procrastinate, you renegotiate, you move the goalpost, you quietly abandon it, and then you blame yourself, or maybe you self-flagellate yourself. That's not a discipline issue. That's an identity mismatch, right? So think about this. Somebody who is built to be a gymnast, which is usually somebody who's tiny and petite, probably isn't going to be a good football player, right? There is a nature of how if you're how you're built is going to be optimized for the role that you're doing, especially in sports. Well, this is no different. We've got to make sure that your goals are aligned. That does not mean that your identity is permanent. You can choose a different identity. But in this moment, while you are making financial goals right now, we've got to make goals that fit with the identity that you hold right now. And then as you start to think through, does this identity work for me? Was this identity inherited? Then you can start to think about what aspects of my identity do I want to alter, right? So let's walk through what this looks like in real life, because this is where people finally feel seen. So, first, let's talk about the builder. Builders love structure, they love plans, they love measuring progress. But builders often sabotage themselves by over engineering the plan, waiting for the perfect setup, turning goals into rigid rules. I did that for a while. A builder will say, I just need the right system. But the truth is, you need more than structure, right? You need permission to iterate and not just take the structure and not change it. It's actually taking a structure and adapting it to what you need. Your goals work when they're simple, when they're trackable, and when they're forgiving, right? Consistency beats complexity every single time for you. Now, let's move on to the caretaker. Again, these are typically firstborns, right? People in large families that are on the older end. Caretakers often don't struggle with saving or responsibility. They struggle with prioritization. Caretaker goals often sound like, Once everybody else is okay, then I'll focus on me, right? Which means later keeps moving. Caretakers sabotage goals by absorbing other people's emergencies. I've heard this a lot, particularly with women, underestimating their own needs, saying, I can't go on that vacation because I need to help so and so with their expenses, treating self investment as optional. Your goals don't fail because you're undisciplined. They fail because you've never been taught that your sustainability matters too. And you can't take care of anybody else if you're not taking care of yourself. A goal that doesn't protect you doesn't last. And let me tell you, your body will know that. The next one is the maximizer. Maximizers are ambitious, they're capable, they're energized by progress, and they often set goals that look like pay this off, grow that, invest here, upgrade this, start that, right? And they're doing it all at once. The problem is obviously not a lack of effort, but that's what we mean by goal stacking. Too many goals dilute the momentum. For maximizers, the question isn't, what can I do? For maximizers, the question it's what you need to redirect your attention is, what deserves my focus right now? That means one primary goal, one supporting goal, and everything else waits. They look at this as, well, Elaine, that's playing small, but it's actually not. It's actually playing smart, right? And that's what we're trying to do. And finally, the minimalist strategist. Minimalists value peace. They hate mental clutter. They want fewer decisions. But minimalists often sabotage goals by delaying decisions. I can't tell you how often that comes up with my entrepreneurs that I work with. Avoiding financial mess or choosing comfort over clarity. They're comfortable, but they don't actually move anything to get clear. A minimalist might say, I just want things to be simple. But simplicity doesn't come from actually avoidance. It comes from intentional design and or boundary making and boundary holding. Your goals work when they reduce future decisions, the amount of future decisions. They automate outcomes and they remove friction instead of actually adding on to it. Avoiding goals doesn't protect your peace, but designing them does protect your peace. So this is super, super important. And I can't tell you how many times I see this with small business owners. They often fall into this category. If this breakdown feels uncomfortably accurate, you are not alone. This is exactly the work that we do inside of the Do Different Better work. So if this has been helpful, I encourage you to follow me at Do Different Better or Do Better with Elaine on Instagram. You can also find me on LinkedIn. Please subscribe on YouTube so that you don't miss what's coming up next. And you can explore resources at dodifferentbetter.com. Now, I want to bring all of this all together. So we've talked about these 4 different wealth identities, and maybe you're in between one, and maybe you've got a little one, a little most, but I really want you to think about most often, which one, where do you fall? Now, here's the shift that I want you to make. Financial goals are not moral commitments. They are design choices. You're not bad if a goal doesn't stick. You're informed. You have now new data. And when you align goals with your actual identity, motivation feels steadier, decisions feel clearer, and progress feels lighter. So I hope that you're really picking up from all of this of like how important it is that once you get clear about your wealth identity, again, it's what is your identity in this moment? Maybe 10 years ago, you might have out of all the things that I heard said, oh, you know what? That actually resonated with me 10 years ago. And 10 years from now, you may have a different wealth identity because the goal is that you've done some things, you've learned some things, you've gotten some new data about where you're going, what you're doing, but also your life plans may have changed. And so that's also going to have an influence on what your wealth identity is as far as I can't be a minimalist anymore because I really have this financial hurdle that I know is going to be coming up. Maybe it's paying for college tuition, yours or somebody else's. Maybe it's you're looking to buy a house. Once you've purchased that house, your wealth identity might be changed by the fact that you've now purchased a house and all the things that come with managing that asset. So just know your wealth identity is not permanent. Two, you can influence it and change it. But what I really want you to get across today is that what is my automatic response when I'm thinking about money and how am I navigating it right now, and correlate that to one of these four identities so that you can have a better understanding of, hey, let me look at the goals that I've set over the last few years. And does it make sense now with this, now that I've identified my wealth identity, can I now understand why though I was not successful in accomplishing those goals? I would love to hear from you, whether it is or it isn't. If you've had an aha moment, if you have now have some clear understanding or data about where you are and why goals were not successful in the past, or why goals were successful. You were like, oh no, I didn't even know that this was a thing, Elaine. And you know what? Now, yes, I understand why I was successful. And now you can leverage that for your future success. Now, heading into our final segment, we're going to be talking about how to move from identity to action without turning this into another exhausting self improvement project, right? That's not what I'm looking for you to have to do. So, you are listening to the Do Different Better show on AM 950. I am your host, Elaine Rasmussen. And when we come back, we're talking about how to work with your wealth identity, not against it, and what that looks like in making real financial decisions. I'll see you after the break. Welcome back to the Do Different Better show. I'm your host, Elaine Rasmussen. If you're just joining us, today's episode is about wealth identity, how you relate to money, and why that relationships matters more than any other tactic. So let's close this out the right way. Let me first say this clearly before we go any further. You do not need to become someone else to build wealth. You don't need to be more aggressive, be less emotional, be hyper disciplined, think like a finance bro, right? You need to design systems that work with you and how you already are, right? That's the difference between forcing change and creating sustainability, right? Wealth that requires you to fight with yourself will never last. Wealth that requires you to fight with yourself will never last because you will continuously fight, and many times you're going to lose. And that loss is going to have financial implications. And that is why I say you will continue to lose. So let me ground this in reality. For builders to design for their momentum, you've got to use one primary metric. You want to automate your progress and you want to review weekly, not constantly, weekly, maybe monthly, depending on how you've set up your goal and how it's designed. But the question isn't, am I doing enough? It is, am I moving in the right direction? For caretakers to build, what you've got to be working on is you've got to be building boundaries into your plan. So for you, it's going to be really important for you to separate support from rescue, right? You are going to need to be very clear about what are your non-negotiables, right? So in the Do Different Better Live class, this workshop we just had this weekend, one of the women was sharing, and just by the way, it's not just for women, but I have more women who attend than men. Men are welcome to come to my live events. But in this case, this woman talked about, my husband is much more loose with money than I am. And it feels like his looseness with money is out actually undermining the goals that we have set together. And so I asked her, like, have you had that conversation with him? And she's like, well, I've voiced my frustration. And I said, okay, so you voice your frustration, but have you asked for different action, and have you tied consequences to him not applying, or at least hearing from him, like, why does he do that? Does he understand from your perspective why you feel that he is undermining your goals? Asking him how he feels about that, but also, what is the non-negotiable for you? How long will you allow that to continue, and what will be the consequence? Is the consequence that you now take over all the finances, which I don't necessarily recommend, because once again, now you're moving into caretaking. Again, you're taking care of everything and relieving this person of any sort of responsibility. Or is it that you are now going to separate your finances, right? Maybe you have a common bank account that all the bills are paid, but anything beyond, above and beyond that, each of you has your own money to be able to spend. None of these are wrong, and all of them are right. But you've got to figure out with you and your partner what makes the most sense. But you've got to, before you have a conversation with your partner, you've got to identify what are your non-negotiables. Is a non-negotiable, we both agree that we're not going to spend more than $200 without checking in with one another, right? If we are going to make a purchase that's over $200, we need to have a text, a call, whatever that is, before we spend that money, that we are mutually agreeing that we are going to spend that money, particularly if you're in a financially sensitive situation, or you know that you are trying to acquire something, right? Maybe it's a house, maybe it's a business. All of those little purchases begin to tell a tale on your credit or with your lender. And so getting really clear about what are your non-negotiables and what will be the consequences of not meeting those negotiables, once they are agreed upon between you and your partner, is super important. Or it maybe it's a family member, right? Maybe it's a parent, maybe you're caretaking for the parent, whatever the case may be is. The next thing is to protect your baseline before doing any giving. And I mean giving of your time, I mean giving of your money. uh, all too often, I hear this all the time from particularly women of, yeah, I don't need a vacation. I don't need to go to the spa. I don't need to, and I'm just like, well, why not? Like, you haven't had a vacation in a year. Why don't you go for 2 days, take a staycation, drive 2 hours north or south or whatever, just to get away. You're handling, you're a chauffeur, you're a party planner, you're doing all of these things for your family or even for yourself. Maybe you're single, you're holding it down. It is okay, as long as it's, you can pay for it. It is okay to treat yourself, right? And but also, what I would encourage you to do is decide what treating yourself looks like. And if you need to, put a dollar amount on that. I do that. I have a dollar amount of, like, I am allowed to buy random stuff that I know that I don't need. I have a dollar amount that I get to just spend. It's episodic, right? But I have that amount that's put away in my budget every month. Sometimes I buy something, sometimes I don't. But one of my caveats is it doesn't get to roll over, right? So if in January I didn't make any random purchases, right, with that allotted amount of money, the difference of what I spent or I didn't spend doesn't roll over to the next month. I just have that amount for the next month. Now, what does that tell you what's going to happen at the end of the year? If in January I have a certain amount of money, let's just say it's $200, right? And I only spent 50 and I didn't spend $150. And the next month I only spend $75. So now that's $125 that's going to, like, go into the next, that I have now on the books. Now, what I've done is instead of spending $200 every single month, which is $2,400 over the course of the year, maybe what I probably spent was maybe $800, right? So now what I can do with that balance that I didn't use, maybe I go and buy a CD. Maybe I put that in savings. Maybe I use that to actually like do something. I invest that money in some other way. Maybe I put that in the stock market, right? So these are the different ways that you can set up and gamify how you are thinking about money and how you can put boundaries that actually feel good to you as opposed to boundaries that feel like they're restricting you, a collar around your neck. So back to generosity. Generosity without stability leads to burnout. You're just going to keep giving and giving and giving and giving and giving. And I personally believe that's where heart attacks come from. That's where other kinds of health issues come from. I personally believe that that's what causes you to develop bad cells in your body, which then have the possibility of leading to cancer, right? Because your body is turning on each other. We have such an inordinate amount of autoimmune diseases now. And I really think that is because of we are not mentally and emotionally and physically taking care of ourselves. We're putting so many people in front of us, and our body just starts to break down on upon itself. And I just don't want that to happen to you. Your plan should protect you and not consume you, right? It shouldn't feel awful, right? So now let's talk about maximizers. With with them, it's about limit inputs and not ambition. So for maximizers, they actually need fewer goals and they need clear sequencing. I am going to reach this rung on the step ladder. And when I reach that, I'm going to go to this rung of the step ladder, and so on and so on and so on. And they need longer time horizons as opposed to like being able to check off like, oh, I did a thing every day or every week. They might have to think about my goal is to actually set aside $5,000 this year. And the intent is that that $5,000 is going to go in the stock market, right? And I am going to, that's the big goal. The sequence goal is I am going to save X amount of dollars a month, right? I'm going to put in this amount of money every single month from my paycheck that then is going to lend itself to me being able to have that $5,000 at the end of the year to make that investment into a CD, into the stock market, whatever, buying life insurance, whatever the case may be. Progress accelerates when your focus actually narrows. And I know for some of my maximizers, this may seem counterintuitive, but I'm telling you through my own personal experience, right? It's kind of a less is more kind of concept. Now let's talk about minimalist strategists, right? What they've got to do is reduce future decisions. So one of the things that I recommend is consolidate your accounts, right? If you've got 10 banking accounts, right? Consolidate those into maybe one or two. I suggest one that you have access to and one that's really difficult to have access to. So what I mean by access to, of like maybe you have one that's in a local branch that you can talk to a banker, you can go and make withdrawals easily. You've got an ATM card, whatever the case maybe is. And then you have one that's a little bit more difficult to access. Maybe it's an online bank where you can't just drive up and like ATM it. You don't get an ATM card for that account. You don't do any of the things that make it simple and easy for you to access that money. That's just one idea. There are 1,000 ideas. That's just one. The other thing that you want to do is you want to automate, excuse me, at the hiccups, you want to automate actions. And what that looks like is that first bank account in that brick and mortar, maybe you have every week a certain amount of money that then goes to the online bank every week or every month or every pay period. And now it's automatic. You don't have to think about it. You're not managing it. Maybe it's having your statements digitally sent to you at a certain time of the month. And on that day is when you're sitting down and looking at your expenses, where you overcharge for something, where you undercharge for something, where you charge for something that you never even purchased, right? Did you get that return process that you when you went to the store that needs to show up on your account? reconciling that to make sure you actually got the credit for returning those items. Because sometimes, I'm telling you, I know that I've seen it, especially with a lot of online shopping. There's so much credit that lives out there that doesn't get properly attributed back to the person who purchased it, and so it just sits out there, right? So the other thing is about scheduling thinking time. So going back to what I just talked about is, are you setting aside time? Hey, I'm receiving my income, my statement, my bank statement, my credit card statement, and it's on the day that I've committed that I'm going to review these documents. Because many credit card companies, you can actually schedule your closing date, and based on your closing date, you know that within 5 days you're going to get the statement of that date. So that fifth day should be the day that you decide that that's when I'm going to review my bank account. I'm going to reconcile my checking account. I'm going to do all the things financial. I'm going to transfer money. I'm going to make investment decisions, whatever that looks like for you, right? Once again, peace comes from clarity and not avoiding. You're looking at it without judgment, right? Because that's the other piece of this. You cannot judge yourself. It's like, okay, I made a mistake. I didn't realize that I did not cancel this streaming service after the trial period. I'm going to cancel it now. Period. Done. So these are really, really valuable and important as you begin to think about how you may want to proceed, right? So I'm hoping that this information is super helpful to you. And I really want you to think about, as we close, I want to leave you with one question and not 10, not a worksheet, just one question. Does this financial decision support the life I'm actually trying to live? Right? And you can, I want you to write that down, maybe put it on a post-it, maybe screenshot it as the wallpaper on your phone, right? So every time you're making a purchase, every time you go to the bank, every time you use your ATM, this question will pop up. Does this financial decision support the life I'm actually trying to live? And if the answer is no, I just want you to pause. Just pause, just sit in that moment, right? And really think about and feel what's happening in your brain, what's happening in your heart, and what's happening in your body. And just notice, just sit and notice. Maybe you write a quick voice note. You write a quick note in your phone, or maybe you do a voice memo really quickly to just document what's happening. Because over time, if you do enough of those, you're going to maybe start to see your own pattern and see what's happening. Because maybe you're coming to this conversation like, Elaine, I don't know which one I am. I know you've made all these criteria, and I feel like I'm all of them, right? Well, this is a good way for you to kind of zero in on that. Start recording how you're feeling when you see this question, when you're faced with a financial decision, and what's sitting with you. But if the answer is yes, go ahead and proceed with confidence. That is your wealth identity actually showing up in action. So, if today's episode has helped you name something you've felt for a long time, here's how I want you to stay connected. Smash the subscribe button on YouTube. Follow me at Do Better with Elaine on Instagram, or you can find me on LinkedIn, whichever your social media pleasure, or you can visit over at DoDifferentBetter.com for resources, events, and what's next. I'm actually going to be hosting some Finance Fridays on Instagram, or actually Facebook, because now that Instagram has its weird algorithm thing, right? So I'm going to be hosting them live on, I'm going to be having Facebook Fridays, Finance Facebook Fridays. And this will be an opportunity where you can come and ask me anything. It'll just be, I'll be on for like 20 or 30 minutes. You can ask me your financial questions. If I've got an answer, I'll give you one. If I don't, I'll try to give you a resource and not leave you hanging, right? But this is actually the work, right? This is the work. This is the shift. And this is how you do different better. You're listening to the Do Different Better show. I'm your host, Elaine Rasmussen, and I am so happy and proud that you're listening to this on AM 950 or you're watching this on YouTube. And until next time, I will see you where we get to do different, better together.